Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the suffering servant passage of Isaiah. We're in chapter 42. And I said last time, looking ahead, sorry about that, and looking ahead in my notes off to the side here, that the prophet will be talking a little bit about himself. That's not till later. In this passage that we have God's internal monologue that we get to overhear. It's an amazing thing that we sometimes have in the prophets. I think the greatest example of it is Hosea 11. It's a long, extended passage where God is on the verge of sending the northern kingdom into Assyrian captivity, and he says, "My heart is turned over within me. I don't want to have to do this. I love them. He's my son, but they've made this impossible. They have earned these consequences, and we get to hear God's internal monologue based upon His love for us, but also based upon God's own justice. Those two things are only in conflict because we put them there with our own sin, which brought about God's plan to bring us the suffering servant, the Messiah, at all. So anyway, we get God's internal monologue in our passage today. Before we look at it, I want to remember something, and we said yesterday that God goes forth for our salvation. We talked about the ways that He accomplished His victory, and we also said His enemies are not individual persons, but sin itself and the forces of sin. And He's going to say that today. It's idolatry, and those who practice and promote idolatry, that He's going to be destroying. And I think probably more specifically, the children of Israel themselves who promote idolatry, not just those pagan idolaters in other countries, but the children of Israel were so idolatrous. And honestly, during the reign of Manasseh, the southern kingdom was more idolatrous than the northern kingdom ever was. Anyway, I just want us to remember something that Paul says in Romans chapter 6, verse 12. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and powers and world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. And I think God is declaring His victory and announcing His complete victory over those kinds of forces in this passage. Persons are certainly referenced, but not people just because they come from a certain country or of a certain color or a certain background, but those who have chosen to promote idolatry against the worship of God. Verse 14, we'll read through verse 17. I have kept silent for a long time. I have kept still and restrained myself. Now, like a woman in labor, I will groan. I will both gasp and pant. I will lay waste the mountains and the hills, and wither all their vegetation. I will make the rivers into coastlands, and dry up the ponds. I will lead the blind by a way they do not know, and paths they do not know. I will guide them. I will make darkness into light before them, and rugged places into plains. These are the things I will do, and I will not leave them undone. They shall be turned back and utterly put to shame who trust in idols, who say to molten images, you are our gods. So, God says, I've been quiet for too long. Now I'm going to be like a woman in labor. I'm going to groan and pant, and then this salvation is going to be birthed. It's such an amazing thing to think about, because how did Jesus come? He was born. Jesus was born. And there are more. I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm about to say. God is a He, period. He refers to Himself as He. He is a He. But there are so many feminine metaphors God uses to describe Himself in the poetic books and in the prophetic books, whether He calls Himself a mother hen, whether David says, I'm sitting on God's lap like I'm sitting on my mother's lap, or here, where God says, compares what's about to happen to a woman in childbirth. These are just metaphors, they're descriptors. But He uses feminine ones. He's just called Himself a warrior, and now He's called Himself a mother in childbirth. God is a he, but he's not a man. He transcends human identity. He is a he. That's how he describes himself. But let's be clear. Let's not take a human descriptor and make it limit God. God is bigger than the entire universe. He's certainly bigger than humanity itself. And so anyway, but I think that's pretty cool. And so he's gonna lay waste. He's already said he's gone out against his enemies. He's going to lay waste, and that laying waste is going to have two effects. It's going to make it easier to lead the blind because the ground's going to be flat. And this reaches all the way back to the beginning of the suffering servant passage. Let's make the road straight. Let's flatten the mountains. Let's fill in the ravines so that because the king is coming. And he describes doing that very thing. And he's going to lead the blind, and he's going to make light for the blind. And he's going to talk about serving the deaf and the blind, and the servant being a light to the nation, and how his people ought to have been a light to the nation in the ensuing passages. So it's all going to connect in that way. So his victory is going to be about reclaiming people who are lost, who want to be found, who want to follow him from any nation. Isaiah begins in chapter 2 with a vision of the mountain of God and all nations streaming to it. But those who persist in promoting the worship of idols, those forces of darkness, those forces of sin in the world, they will utterly be destroyed and put to shame. Verse 17. Okay, God is going to be speaking to the deaf and to the blind in the next section. We'll look at that next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.